Hey everybody, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and for today's video, I'm going to show you my newest, not-so-budget commander build using Dina Soulsteeper as the commander. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help in supporting my channel, which can be done in the following ways. Subscribing to the channel, sharing any of my content on your socials, watching some of my many other videos, purchasing super thanks, purchasing channel memberships, purchasing decks that you may have seen on this channel directly from me on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page, and/or visiting our sponsor at arcane-fortress.com and using discount code BlueBear at checkout if you decide to purchase any of their amazing gaming supplies from them. Anything that you do will help support my channel immensely, and I thank you for it. Now that that is out of the way, let's get to today's video. So to clarify, this deck is not part of my 32 deck challenge, nor is it a requested build for a customer. Instead, I built this for my partner to replace the Euro deck that I built for her about 3 years ago. Why am I replacing her Euro deck, you ask? Well, it's an interesting story that I may have talked about before, but regardless, I'm going to tell it anyway. You can skip this part if you like by using the timestamps that I have provided. So, the story goes that my partner stopped playing due to a situation involving our last playgroup, where one of them ended up ruining some of the cards in her deck thanks to water damage. She was so mad about it that she just decided rather than to just simply replace the cards, she just didn't want to play anymore and stopped inviting people over for what was our normal Friday Commander nights. I thought making her a Euro deck would entice her to come back, but that failed, so now that deck is basically just mine to use. Then one day, a friend of mine invited us to her house to play Magic specifically, and my partner said she would give it a try again and went through my budget decks to see what she would rather use instead of Euro. She picked the Dina deck that I had made because she likes green and pretty things, and this deck was good enough to meet those requirements. She ended up loving the theme of the deck, won the game that we played handily, and said if we were to play again, this is what she wanted to play. Unfortunately, 2 days later, the deck sold, and I didn't have any more copies of Dina left to build another one, so I did what any person who really wants their partner to play Magic would do. I bought her a fancy schmancy version of Dina and decided to make her a deck, but without any of the budget restrictions. However, just like the Miku deck that I built for my son, I only built a deck using cards I already had, or cards I could acquire through trades. So now that you know the story, let me tell you what Dina does, and then I'll show you how I built her with no limitations on budget this time. Dina is 1 green and 1 black mana to cast for a 1/3 legendary Dryad Druid with 2 abilities. The first ability says that whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. The second ability says that for the cost of 1 mana, and sacrificing another creature, Dina Soulsteeper gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is a sacrificed creature's power. This build will revolve around the first ability almost entirely, but the second ability can be a useful sack outlet in a pinch as well. So now that you know what Dina does, and the basic strategy that the deck will be focused on, let me show you what I put in the rest of the 99. As I like to do, I'll start with the lands. First up are the mana-fixing lands. I tried to use as many lands as I could that didn't enter play tapped, even if there were some hoops that you would have to jump through for them to enter untapped. I don't have any bayous, unfortunately, and I'm working towards getting some for decks that need them, so until then, here's what I chose. Command Tower, Overgrown Tomb, Woodland Cemetery, Deathcap Glade, Undergrowth Stadium, Necroblossom Snarl, Tainted Wood, Llanowar Wastes, and Dark Boar Pathway, which, when you take it out, it's a dual modal card that on the other side is Slither Boar Pathway, and the way you play these is you play either one side or the other, and they tap to add whichever side you chose. As for the utility lands, I wanted some stuff that did like fetching, or life gain, or even sack outlets, so this is what I came up with. Verdant Catacombs, Fabled Passage, and Riveteer's Overlook were there for fetching, for deck thinning, and even, shockingly enough, the Riveteer's Overlook let you gain a life, which is good for Dina. I also added Boseiju, who endures, for some removal. So this is one of those unique lands that let you channel it, or it means discard it to have an effect when you pay the mana. So for 2, you can discard it and destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or a non-basic land that your opponents control. And the reason why I wanted this in here was I was looking for more ways to add land destruction of non-basic lands, or any land at that point, really, because you never know what you're going to find out there. So I actually doubled it up and added Ghost Quarter as well, so I could destroy even more lands. Then I added Sapseep Forest, which is a unique land. It's actually a forest that's a non-basic forest. It enters tapped, but you can pay a green and tap it to gain a life, but only if you have 2 or more green permanents. Castle Locthwain was because I wanted more card draw, and the life that you pay for each of those cards you draw is nominal considering that this is a life gain deck. High Market was the sack outlet I was looking for. It taps to add a colorless, doesn't come into play tapped, and then you can just tap it and sack a creature to gain a life, which is great. Now, normally when it comes to the basic lands, I just tell you how many of each were in there, or I direct you to the deck list link in the description. But the basic lands for this deck had purpose. My partner likes her scenery to be pretty, and she also likes Bob Ross. So I went with these 2 forests, and then these 2 swamps, because they were part of the Bob Ross secret lair. I figured she would like that. I went with these forests because recently we bought a painting that went in our living room that was a little similar to this, so I thought she would like that. And then I went with these swamps because they were pretty much the prettiest swamps I could find in my collection. As far as the ramp goes for this build, normally when I build green, I like to have more instants or sorceries that go and fetch lands for you and put them into play, and less of the mana rocks. But for this one, it's flip-flopped. I have more mana rocks because of the ones that I found and what they do. So I'll just show you. We start off with a Soul Ring and an Arcane Signet because that's just basic. But then I went and put a Pristine Talisman in because when you tap it, it can add a life to your life total, which will trigger Dina. And then I found Ancient Cornucopia in my collection, which allows you to gain life and mana fixes because it taps to add a color of any mana. The caveat here is that the gain life part of this card only triggers once a turn, but it triggers once each turn, not just yours. And then, of course, I added the sorceries that go and fetch lands for you that green's famous for. Things like Nature's Lure, which goes and gets a forest card, not a basic forest. So you can go get things like Sapseep Forest or any of the duels that have land types. Same thing with 3 visits. Remember, these don't enter play tapped. And the last card that was for my ramp section is Farseek, which does almost the same thing as the last 2 cards, only now it does it for anything but a forest. The creatures are where this gets a little more interesting. Black and green have quite a few ways to gain life and utilize that life gain, so I had this split up into 5 different things that you can do. The first thing is through lifelink. I went and found the most efficient that I could as far as casting cost to abilities on the creatures. So the first one is Vampire of the Dire Moon, which is a 1-cast 1/1 lifelinking Death Toucher. Then I have Valentin, Dean of the Vein, which is the 1-cast 1/1 with Menace and lifelink. And then a third ability that says whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead, which is very anti-graveyard recursion for your opponents. Then it says, when you do, you may pay 2 generic mana, and if you do, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with whenever this creature dies, you gain a life. And that's a small sub-theme in this deck, so keep that in mind when I talk about pests. You also can turn it over and see that it's a dual modal card, so you can play the other half. I don't care about that, I only want this side. Gifted Aetherborn is another efficiently costed lifelinking creature. It's 2 to cast for a 2/3 with Death Touch and lifelink. Murderous Rider is a 3 to cast 2/3 with lifelink, and then whenever it dies, you may put it on the bottom of your library. But it also has a adventure called Swift End, which for 3 you can cast it as an instant adventure, and it will destroy target creature or planeswalker and you will lose 2 life, which is not that big of a deal because this is a life gain deck. Then Vampire Nighthawk, a 3 to cast 2/3 with flying, Death Touch, and lifelink. Very efficient. And the last lifelinker is Nighthawk Scavenger, which is a 3 to cast 1+*3 with again flying, Death Touch, and lifelink. And the 1+* means that it's equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So that's the lifelinkers. Then we have the triggered life gain abilities, and there are a bunch of different ways we're going to do that. So we'll start off with Spectrum Sentinel, which is a 1 to cast 1/2 with a built-in protection from multicolored. So anything that is more than one color can't block it, can't deal damage to it. It's just protected from all that. And then it has an ability that says whenever a non-basic land comes into play under an opponent's control, you will gain a life. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of players that play Commander play a lot of non-basics, so this could be very devastating. Essence Warden, a 1 to cast 1/1 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life, and it doesn't matter whose side of the board it came on. Prosperous Innkeeper does care, though. It's a 2 to cast 1/1 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And it also has, whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a treasure token, which isn't really relevant, but it's good for ramping. Social Climber, it's almost the same thing. It's a 3 to cast 3/2 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Then we have Ayara, First of Locthwain. It's a 3 to cast 2/3 that says whenever it or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent will lose a life and you will gain a life. And if Dina's out, they will also lose another life. It also has a sacrifice ability on it that says you can tap it and sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. Pests are considered black creatures, so keep that in mind. The next one is Death Greeter. It's a 1 to cast 1/1 that says whenever another creature is put into a graveyard, not yours, a graveyard from play, you may gain a life. Sangromancer, 4 to cast 3/3 with flying, that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life, and whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. Now, we have ways to kill things, but there's not a lot of ways to make people discard, so on that ability, you're relying on your opponents to have that kind of stuff happen. Next up is Sheoldred, the Apocalypse. This is probably one of the better cards made in, last 5-10 years. It's a 4 to cast 4/5 with Death Touch, and right there alone, that's just good. But then it has 2 really strong abilities. It says whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, which is the reason why I had that in here. And then whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. So that's actually anti them drawing cards, which is nice. This is a really strong card. Most people like to use it as the commander. I like to be a little more sneaky and put it in the 99. Then we're going to have a couple of landfall abilities that help you gain life. So, first one is Jedi Offshoot. It's a 1 to cast 0/3 with Defender, that when a land enters play, you gain a life. Kazandu Nectarpod is a 2 to cast 1/3 that whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Grazing Gladeheart lets you gain 2 life whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. And then Courser of Crufix. Okay, it's a 3 to cast 2/4 with 3 abilities. One of them is that you gain a life whenever a land enters play under your side. However, it also has that you play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play cards from the top of your library if it's a land card. So not bad. It's got a lot of stuff, but the main point is that it lets you gain life. Then I have activated ways to gain life. So we start off with Scavenging Ooze, 2 to cast 2/2. You activate it by paying a green, and you exile a target card from a graveyard, and if it was a creature card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze, and you gain a life. And similarly is Timoret, Chosen from Death, which is a 2 to cast 2-star, where the toughness is equal to devotion to black, and if you need me to explain that, I will. And then it has the activated ability that for a black and 1 generic, you can exile up to 2 cards from graveyards, not the same graveyard, from graveyards. And you gain a life for each creature card that was exiled this way. The next set of creatures are what I call the payoff creatures. When you gain life, they do something. So we'll start off with something like Starscape Cleric, which is a 2 to cast 2/1 with Offspring, Flying, can't block, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. Offspring is basically a weird kicker. It means that if you pay the Offspring cost, you will also create another copy of this exact creature, only it's a 1/1 instead of a 2/1. So it will also have Flying, it can't block, and whenever you gain life, each opponent will lose a life. So this can actually put 2 copies of that effect on the board at the same time. And then additionally, things like Marauding Blight Priest, which is a 3 to cast 3/2 that has that same ability that whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. And of course, Epicure of Blood is a beefier version of that, which is a 5 to cast 4/4 that does that too. The last payoff I'm going to show you is Witch of the Moors. It's a 5 to cast 4/4 with Death Touch that says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life, each opponent now sacrifices a creature and you return up to 1 creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That's a pretty big payoff because there is no graveyard recursion in this deck, so if you lose a key piece that's a creature, this can help get it back for you. The last section of creatures are the utility creatures, ones that don't necessarily have to do with life gain, but they could. So we have Sedgemoor Witch, which is a 3 to cast 3/2 with Menace. A ward that is to pay 3 life, so your opponents can't target it unless they pay 3 life. And then a Magecraft that says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain a life. So it's not necessarily life gain, but it can lead to it. Erebos Bleak-Hearted is a 4 to cast 5/6 that's indestructible. And as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, it's just an enchantment, not a creature. Then whenever another creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life, and if you do, you draw a card. And that's kind of key. There's no mana cost there, but there is life cost. And this deck gains you enough life that it should not matter. When a creature dies, you should be able to pay the 2 life. And then it has an activated ability that says for 2, you can sacrifice another creature to have target creature get -2/-1 until end of turn. And the last utility creature, and last creature in the deck, is Beledros Witherbloom. It's a 7 to cast 4/4 flyer that says at the beginning of each upkeep, not just yours, every player's upkeep, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain a life. That's a lot of tokens that it could create if it doesn't get taken care of quickly. Then it has another ability that says you can pay 10 life to untap all lands you control, but only do it once each turn. Moving on to the instants/sorceries part of this deck, most of this is going to be removal except for the last card. So we start off with Pest Infestation, which is 1 green and double X to cast. I will explain double X to cast just so that you understand. What that means is for every 1 you want to get out of it, you have to pay 2 mana into it. So if you want X to be 1, you have to pay 2. If you want X to be 2, you have to pay 4, and so on and so on. What the card does is it destroys up to X target artifact and or enchantments, and then create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens that, when they die, you gain a life. What I liked about this card is it actually made itself very usable. It says destroy up to X, which means that you can pay more into X than actually have available targets and get that many pest tokens. So it's either removal and or it's creature token creation. One of the two. The next one is Torment of Hellfire. Now, I said this deck doesn't have much when it comes to discard, but this card is the one card. So it's 2 black and X, and you repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player either sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. It's technically removal because it's life removal, or it's permanent removal, or it's hand removal, one of the 3. Tear Asunder, it's a 2 to cast instant with a kicker. So it's either 1 green and 1 at instant speed to exile target artifact or enchantment, or if you pay the kicker cost, you can now exile target non-land permanent at instant speed. It's good removal. It's actually one of the better cards from this set. Beast Within, it's a 3 to cast instant that just says destroy target permanent. It doesn't mean it can't destroy land because it doesn't say non-land permanent, so it can destroy anything on the board, but its controller gets a 3/3 green beast creature token in its place. Toxic Deluge, it's a 3 to cast sorcery that as an additional cost to cast it, you must pay X life, and all creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. It's a good board wipe. It's actually one of the better ones. Assassin's Trophy is a 2 to cast instant that says destroy target permanent that an opponent controls, and then they search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Abrupt Decay is a 2 to cast instant that can't be countered by either spells or abilities, and destroys a non-land permanent with a mana value of 3 or less. Damnation is a 4 to cast sorcery that is basically Wrath of God, but for black. It destroys all creatures, and they can't be regenerated. And then the final instant/sorcery will be Dig Up. Dig Up is 1 green, and it lets you search your library for a basic land card and put it into your hand, or you can pay the cleave cost, which is 1 green, 2 black, and 1, to go search your library for any card and put it into your hand. I didn't have a lot of tutors left over from all the decks that I've been building. I'm in the market to pick up demonic tutors and grim tutors and all that stuff. So that will be in the eventual update video. Now let's talk about the enchantments that I chose for this deck. We start with a card called Oubliette. This is an old card that was reprinted recently. Not that recently, but recently enough. It's a 3 to cast enchantment that puts an opposing player's commander in jail, and they can't do much about it unless they remove Oubliette. So it says when it enters the battlefield, target creature phases out until this card leaves the battlefield, and then you tap that creature if it phases back in. So phasing is not removal. It does not destroy or exile the card. So if you target somebody's commander with this, unless they remove Oubliette, they cannot get it back. It's not changing a zone because phasing out doesn't change a zone. So they are stuck without their commander. And if their game plan is solely based on their commander, it screws them over. It's a good card. This one is an older card. It's called Power Leech. It is a 2 to cast enchantment, and I'm going to have up on the screen the new wording, but basically what it does is anytime an opponent taps an artifact or activates an artifact, you gain a life. What that means is if somebody taps their Soul Ring, you gain a life whenever they do that. Any mana rock that they tap, you gain a life. Anytime they sacrifice a food token or a treasure token or a clue token, you gain a life. There's a lot of life gain that can be gained in a 4-player format, especially with the popularity of all the treasure tokens and clue tokens and stuff like that. That's a really good card.
Next is Life Gift. It is a 3D cast enchantment that says whenever a land comes into play, you may gain a life. That includes your opponents. It's kind of like Landfall, but for everybody. It's kind of good. Druid class is a 2D cast enchantment that has 3 levels. The 3rd level I'm not really going to go over because it doesn't have any real bearing for this deck. It's the other 2. So when it comes into play, you have the ability to gain a life every time a land comes into play under your control. And that's the main reason for this card. The 2nd level, okay, it's good. You may now play an additional land on each of your turns, and that could be useful when you draw a lot of cards. So overall, really good for this deck. Trudge Garden is a 3D cast enchantment that says whenever you gain life, and you should be gaining a lot of life, and it's for each instance, and there are a lot of instances of life gain in this deck. You may pay 2 generic mana, and if you do, you create a 4/4 green fungus beast creature token with trample. So what I liked about this was that if for some reason the whole gain life and drain your opponents or gain and drain aspect isn't working, you could always try go wide token. But there's also one other thing with Trudge Garden that I will go over in a little bit that you will like. The next one is Blood Chief Ascension. This is a 1 to cast enchantment that says at the beginning of each end step, every player's end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you put a quest counter on Blood Chief Ascension. And then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Blood Chief Ascension has 3 or more of those counters on them, you may have that player lose 2 life, and if they do, you gain 2 life. So I know that this combos well with Mindcrank, but this is not what this deck is. This is for the life gain aspect. Next is Blight Mound. It is a 3D cast enchantment that has all of your attacking pests that you control get +1/+0 and Menace. And then it also facilitates its own ability where it says whenever a non-token creature that you control dies, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token that when it dies, you gain a life. So it's actually one of those weird cards that it has an ability that helps itself. It's kind of cool. And I like the fact that this has a sub-theme of pests. Next up is Revenge of Ravens. It's a 4 to cast enchantment that says whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller loses a life and you gain a life. So if they chose 4 creatures to attack you, they lose 4 life and you gain 4 life. Really good in this deck. Next is Sanguine Bond, and this is basically just for redundancy for your commander, because Dina says that whenever you gain life, each opponent loses life. This is a little bit simpler than that. This says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So the differences here are that it's targeting instead of each, and it's not just 1 life, it's however much life you gained. Now, I had to add the other half of that combo in because, I mean, it just fits. So I added the Exquisite Blood for what I call Baby's first combo, the Blood Bond combo, that says whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. And yes, for anybody wondering, this is an infinite combo, and yes, this is the cheesiest combo, and it's like the most beginner one. But I mean, she's not a veteran of this game, so I had to add it. Then we have Moldervine Reclamation. It's a 5 to cast enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. It's very repeatable card draw and life gain. And the last enchantment is called Greed. It's 4 to cast enchantment that you have to pay a black and 2 life to draw a card. This is a placeholder because I did not have another Necropotence, but we'll see how this plays out because when you combine it with Shieldred the Apocalypse, this actually triggers Shieldred, whereas Necropotence doesn't, so it may stay, who knows. Next, let's talk about the artifacts. We have 2 kinds of artifacts in this. We're going to have life gain artifacts, and then we're going to have utility artifacts. So we start off with Profane Memento. It's 1 to cast and says whenever a creature card is put into your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you gain a life. That includes milling, that includes discarding, all that. Then we have Elixir of Immortality. It's 1 to cast, and then you pay 2 and tap it to gain 5 life, and then shuffle it and your graveyard into your library. This is the Fallout Secret Lair version. I thought it was pretty cool to put in there. It does what I want, because if you do lose some of the things that are key to winning the game, this is one of your only ways to get it back. And it gains you life along the way. Tablet of the Guilds is a beast in this deck. It's a 2 to cast artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you choose 2 colors. And for this deck, it's obvious that you're going to choose black or green. And it says whenever you cast a spell, if it's at least one of those colors, you gain 1 life for each of those colors that it is. Lembas is one of my favorite cards in recent times. I'm actually going to start collecting these, so if anybody has any extras they don't want, please send them to me. It's a 2 to cast artifact that is also a food, that when it enters the battlefield, you scry 1 and then draw a card. It's a food, so you can pay 2, tap, and sack it to gain 3 life. But the cool part is that when it is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you shuffle it into your library. That doesn't mean that you can only do it when you sacrifice it as a food. It means if somebody destroys it, or if you sacrifice it to some other ability, you get it back. It's a really cool card. I actually like the design of that. And then the last life gain artifact is called Cosmos Elixir. It's a 4-cast artifact that says at the beginning of your end step, you draw a card if you have more life than your starting life total, or you gain 2 life. So it's the best of both worlds. Either it helps you get above your starting life total, or it helps you draw cards. Either way, it's a win-win. As for the utility stuff, Ashnod's Altar, it's a sack outlet that you need that lets you gain mana, and there are some implications of infinite combos with that I'll talk about in a little bit. Well of Lost Dreams is 4 to cast. It says whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life that you gained, and if you do, you draw X cards. What that means is, if you gained 1 life, you pay 1 mana, you draw 1 card. If you gained like 4 life, and you only had 2 mana available, you could pay the 2 mana to draw 2 cards off of it. And it's for each instance of life gain, so it can trigger a lot. And the last artifact is a pure utility card. It's Lightning Greaves. It just helps protect either your commander or anybody that's on the battlefield that you want to protect from being targeted. And the last card in the deck is a Planeswalker called Sorin the Mirthless. This is a 4 to cast Planeswalker that enters play with 4 loyalty counters and has 3 loyalty abilities. The first one is an uptick of 1 that says that you can look at the top card of your library. Then you may put that card into your Then you may reveal that card and put it in your hand, and if you do, you pay life equal to the mana value of that card. So it puts cards in your hand. It's not card draw, it's quasi card draw, but still card draw. The second ability is you have to remove loyalty from it, 2 of them in fact, to create a 2/3 vampire creature token with both flying and lifelink. And that really plays well into this because one of the weaknesses of this deck is we don't have a lot of flyers. We have some, but not a lot. And then the ultimate, it's not a great ultimate. It's okay. It fits the theme of the deck. You're probably not going to use it often. It says that Sorin the Mirthless deals 13 damage to any target, and you gain 13 life. It fits the theme of the deck, but it's not that great. It's in here for the first 2 abilities.
Now, throughout this video, I've mentioned multiple times that a few of the cards lead to a combo, so let me show you what I was talking about. The combo uses Essence Warden or any of the creatures that you gain life when a creature enters play on your side, Trudge Garden, and Ashnod's Altar. The combo results in 6 different infinites, but the one I'm most interested in is the infinite life gain triggers because each trigger also triggers Dina along with a bunch of other cards that will help you win the game. If you don't see how this works, don't worry. Just click on the link that just popped up on the top of your screen right now and it will take you to an explanation of how. So there you have it, folks. My latest commander build using Dina Soul Steeper as the commander with no real budget limitations that I built for my partner. I say no budget limitations, but again, I was limited by what I had in my collection or what I was able to trade for. Nothing in this deck besides the Dina card was purchased, and believe me, there are some cards that I didn't have that I wanted to use. That's what an eventual update video is for, right? The hope here is that this deck will be enticing enough to get her to want to play more, but only time will tell. If she liked the budget version, I believe she will really like the not-so-budget version. Fingers crossed. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for more Magic content to watch, please browse my playlists, as I'm sure you'll find more of my videos that you'll enjoy. Before you go, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when I release new content. Have a nice day, and please be sure to check back next Friday for my next long-form video that will hopefully be about a custom Pauper build that I'm currently working on as payment for a friend of the channel.